The worst horror movie I ever saw was fucking great.
Hello and welcome to This May Hurt a Bit. My name is James Strayer and this is
John C. Myers.
And we're a horror franchise podcast discussing each film in popular and not so popular franchises. And today we are wrapping up the Omen franchise, which, much like The Exorcist, has spanned nearly 50 years because we're getting a new one this April. Actually. So be on the lookout for an emergency pod if we brave for the new Omen. But yeah, starting in the 70s, ending... When was that? Oh, yeah. How could I forget? 2006. Yeah, 2006. And then, 2024. But yeah, this was an interesting one just in the main sense of we started really high level. I know I kept calling it classy. Yeah. It's a classy horror movie, much like Psycho. And then we ended like a lot of horror franchises these days with a remake. With a straight to TV and then a remake.
Yeah, a little detour into TV.
I mean, going straight to TV, is obviously a marker of some success or lack thereof for any franchise. However, I mean, look, you can check the tape, I'm sure. Remember, we don't love that one, but there were enough funny bits in that one that I'm just like, for that kind of thing, I don't completely write it off as a complete nadir. I mean, it's the nadir of the series for me in a lot of ways.
For a raw like cash in, it was way more interesting than the Omen remake, I think. Like it was just in terms of like my own personal taste, of just like it got real goofy with it, and I would prefer you go that route than the more serious
austere remake. So I mean this one is different in the sense from our previous franchises. At least the first three, we follow one character all the way through, which I thought was interesting, different for our franchise examination. I mean, I think that that's good and bad in a lot of ways. It's good when you want to keep a consistent lore. And I find that interesting sometimes, even though, of course, you can just sort of like brush it off if you don't want to deal with said lore.
Right. You can he's no longer with the president. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's fine. But what did you make of following one character in a linear story this time? I guess we do that with Saw a little bit. Saw has the soap opera.
Yeah, Saw has so much more of this mythos around it, but like particularly those first two. Well, the latter two were really focused more on Damien as a character, whereas the first one is like about Damien and people reacting to Damien. And I think that's pretty interesting. And as we talked about in the part two, how it's a bummer, that element of the script of him dealing with his finding out he's the son of Satan was so much that was excised, because I think that's a very powerful thing. And they give us a short shrift that it's just an afterthought, almost to the point that I'd rather they didn't do it at all.
Sure.
Yeah. Like seeing that growth and then kind of jumping to the collapse of that empire. Like he's trying to, he's like, oh, I'm almost there, but oh my God, the Nazarene's coming back and I got to deal with that. But it also seems, as we talked about with Becky and all that, this like, there's just so much like middle management and him just kind of doing stuff that it isn't as exciting as the rise to power was. And I think that was an interesting way to pick it back up.
Right. So once you attain power, it's boring.
Yeah.
The rise to power, you want the challenge.
Right. Yeah. There were still, certainly he was after more power, but it seemed like he pretty much had it. And then it was just the management of it.
Yeah. Omen 3 to me was interesting because I kept thinking about the fact that like, oh, we're going to get to see Satan as president. Isn't that funny? Yeah. And again, like he was still the ambassador, correct?
Yeah.
But that's so funny that I built up in my own head just because of that cover art, because it's the seal of the president back there, and how that can affect you, especially when you're like ramping up for the third movie. It's just, especially played by Sam Neill. I wanted to see Sam Neill as Satan, as the president. This is going to rock. Rocked a little less, but I was looking up some criticisms of part 3, and a lot of people were really down on Sam Neill's performance in that, and I got to disagree. Yeah, I enjoyed the over the top hamminess of it.
And I think he's able to rein it in. I mean, even compared to something like Event Horizon, he's he's even bigger in that, But so I think he is big. but I think it works. I think it's still restrained enough that it's not all just like mustache twirly.
Right.
And that is interesting. Like you were saying, that you expect the last two have been Satan kind of like, gaining power. And so you expect that more when it's sort of like, yeah, but he doesn't. It's a little bit of a, I could see that being a little bit of a letdown initially, with that being, the presidential seals on there.
Yeah. Come on.
I did like Sam Neill a lot in that movie. I do like, we touched on this briefly in a previous one, that idea that like the third one is kind of a mirror of the first one, sort of thematically more than plot wise, but you have Gregory Peck trying to preserve the order of his world by this encroaching new baby.
Yeah.
And like what that might mean, like the baby's the devil and all that. And this time you have the devil is sort of is now the ambassador of England, is trying to be the president. And there's this new baby that's coming on that's going to throw up his world, and he's got to try to protect that and all that.
Yeah.
That was a little bit deeper than I actually expected the third one to be. In that regard, but it does make it that interesting of a movie. I think there's a lot of down in that movie, other than the goofy ass pre-squadron, the monk squadron that falls all over the place. They were pretty great.
They were pretty great. Yeah. That one, like I've said, I enjoy the political backdrop of these movies. I feel like if you're going to make an Omen movie, you need politics to be the backdrop of it. That's half of it. But part two definitely like strayed so far into that and, industrial espionage and that kind of stuff that it lost the plot for me a little bit with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a good point, though, where you're thinking about the remake and thinking about, we talk about the ending where it's like, oh, the Pope died. And that kind of like removed the personalness of it. Because like all of this, even though it's dealing with much bigger things like the end of the world and the power of Satan and all this stuff, are still very like personal stories. Like all this corporate intrigue stuff. Yes, you're dealing with thousands, millions of lives at the end of this thing.
Yeah.
But you're still watching these people navigate it. Like it's about them. When you just all of a sudden have the Pope show up and it's like, but he's important, so this is big and meaningful.
Yeah.
It feels less impactful than when it's actually like the people involved. And again, talk about like trying to preserve power. I like that part of two where the other Robert Thorne is like, yeah, he's got this big, powerful machine that he's built, this corporate machine, but then like it's starting to get turned against him and like expand in ways that he didn't expect.
Yeah, from the inside.
From the inside, yeah. And that like it's ultimately they're lying out clearing the path for Damien to get involved. But really it's just sort of imagine you're Colonel Sanders or something. Well, like a less racist and sane Colonel Sanders. And like you've built up KFC and then one of your board of directors like, what if we got into military arms? And you're like, right. I want to make chicken.
I just want to fried chicken in a bucket.
And it's out of your control now. Like it's spiraled out.
Mm-hmm. Well, he is a colonel. So, he should have seen that coming, quite frankly. So in what order would you watch these again?
Honestly, I mean, like probably like almost show order, like almost 1, 2,
I would agree.
3. Yeah. Like I think stars would have to align a certain way for me to want to watch 4 again. I'm not against it, but
I agree. Yeah.
I'm not gonna watch. I don't care about the remake. I just don't care.
Yeah.
There's nothing in there for me that was new compared to what was done previously. So I'd probably go definitely 1 and 2 are up there. Whereas like 3 is a little further away. It's still fine. But then after that it's just whatever.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. 2 even runs a little long at points too. 3, if you just want to see a Sam Neill powerhouse, that's why you put that one on. Yeah. 4, some goofy hippies, and that's about it.
Yeah, so, it's basically like up until the psychic fair, I would watch 4. Then like after that, I mean, the bits with Michael Lerner is fun, but just all that stuff in between is less so. It's just I would just want to watch like a highlight reel of the goofy stuff. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah, hey, that's I mean, I guess that's not too far astray. I mean, I think that's how the Pumpkinheads landed.
Yeah, I think that's just like how it happens a lot. Is like, oh, they started good and then they get bad.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think there's a reason this is referred to as a trilogy.
Right.
That people just kind of forget the 4th one because it stands up. It's fine as a trilogy. Like the 3rd one, like the end is like what just feels. We got to wrap this thing up. I got a plane to catch. Jesus shows up at the end.
Right. I mean,
but I still think there's enough interesting stuff there.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded Jesus showing up at the end of 3 if it wasn't just like he gets practically accidentally stabbed, or maybe not accidentally, but like that was so anticlimactic, which is not something that you should say if your follow-up statement is, and then Jesus returned, because that's about as climactic as you could possibly get. Yeah,
which I mean, also, although I said this was all kind of personal stuff, the 3rd one did finally like get a bit apocalyptic in what Satan can do because when he even though it's still micromanaging and he's like, we got to kill all these babies.
Yeah.
Like that's still this horrendous, giant, awful act versus like I made a crow stare at a lady and she died. And so I liked that it at least tried to do some of that. And it's a bit silly. But I thought it was still trying to take it in some interesting places.
Yeah.
I do think again, like this wasn't planned out to be, like the original writer never imagined more of it, whatever. So I thought they were able to keep it pretty interesting with some missteps, obviously, but and nothing's going to reach the height of the first one. But
yeah,
I don't the drop off. I feel like the drop off for like Psycho 2 is less than the drop off for Omen 2, but it's still not that bad. It's still, you'd only take some fall damage from that.
Right. And it was one of those delightful underappreciated, underseen sequels, especially for me for Psycho. When I finally watched Psycho 2, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually pretty good. And same with the Omen 2. I was still on board, and there's a lot of goofy stuff, but like I was definitely more on board with Omen 2 than I expected to be.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is half the point of this podcast.
Right. Because when the first one is so good, it's hard to just, imagine like, well, what are you going to do here? And not bad.
So I feel like this will ride exactly on the coattails of the previous question, and then we can roll right into part B of this. But what order of preference do you have for our main character of Damien? I mean, it's Damien in each one.
Right.
Except for part 4.
Yeah.
And on the heels of that, like, how do you see his powers evolve? And were they inconsistent? Were they in line the entire time? I mean, for me, I liked watching part 1 the most because it was kind of ambiguous. And I like his performance. Yeah, by far and away better. The kid in part 2 is pretty good. He had a couple of like emotional standout moments that I thought were quite good, like when he's yelling at his cousin or stepbrother. I can't remember who it was.
Right, when they have the big standoff.
Right. So it would go in order of appearance for me, which satanic child I was cheering for the most.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
And part of that is not only the performance, but then also how they address his powers. And it does go from everything from Hypnodog to Final Destination style deaths with poor David Warner being the best one. That kind of stuff. But like his powers are a little all over the place. They're a little hypnotist based, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of it. Like, for a lot of it.
There could be a D&D term for that, but I'm not sure kind of what it is. But, but is he a friend to all animals? Can he control them? Do animals hate him? It just sort of like fluctuated throughout.
Yeah. And the third one, you kind of you would hope they would be bigger. And he does just sort of control some animals, and then just some things. A lot of it, as we talked about, is just the people fighting against him are idiots, and that really works out.
There you go.
But so I think the second one teases a lot more power than he actually has, because with that like mind control and causing people to have aneurysms and all that. Whereas I think that's like a key part of it, because if you're supposed to be this evil son of Satan, that one would think it was more than just like a title. But I do like in the first one how it wasn't so clear that he did any of the, that he had really anything to do with this. It was pretty ambiguous. And whereas I think in the remake, certainly they make him just an evil kid doing they might as well have had him do the Kubrick stare. The close up on shifting eyes. But honestly, there's a part of me that wants to throw Delia higher up on the list, just because
she gets little points.
It's dumb. It's dumb, but she what they end up doing with her characters is pretty stupid. But she's just conveniently evil throughout it, and I like her. She's a little bit more malevolent, I think, than we've seen Damien until he was fully grown. I liked her just being a little jerk about it.
Yeah. Everything from making the little boy pee his pants to decapitating the father
and immediately murdering his dad. That's beautiful. That's some stone cold shit.
Right.
So there's part of me that likes leaning into that aspect of it a bit more. If we're looking just at Damien and powers or whatever. Yeah. That was kind of fun.
Did you have any particular disappointments this one or this series? I struggled to say I'm disappointed that Sam Neill wasn't president, because that's my fault. But
well, they marketed, that idea didn't come out of nowhere.
But I kind of wanted I guess I wanted one of these to be like, I liked part 3, but it was mildly disappointing for me because I wanted it to be a little bit more ham-fisted. I wanted it to be a little bit more grand than just managing people.
Yeah, when it's called The Final Conflict and it's Damien, it's the son of Satan versus the son of God, you kind of expect some more like the end of the Northmen where they're fighting on a nude on a volcano or something.
Heck yeah.
Or just, shooting lasers at each other. I don't know. But yeah, it was very sort of just, like I said, like I think on first blush with that stuff, it is disappointing that it's not as sort of more grandiose. And like this, it's not like this was very effectively done, but I do think thematically there was some interesting stuff there that like we talked about with that sort of like mirroring of the first one and just the banality of evil of just the like, I've got to fill out this paperwork before I can have all these babies killed.
Right.
That I thought was kind of interesting, but it's also like, it's hard in a thing called The Final Conflict and this sort of like bombastic a little bit up, that you listen to that score, the Jerry Goldsmith score, and you don't really expect a sort of more quiet managerial thing to be occurring.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one, like I can't say I was disappointed in the fourth one because like I knew going into it wasn't going to be very good. So I can't really, my expectations were as such. I am again, like I'm not surprised, but I suppose I am a little bit disappointed in the remake simply because it didn't do anything. There didn't do anything to justify itself. And like I said, it wasn't like, as far as the remakes we've done go, it's not bad, but like, it's unnecessary.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. To me, the only point of someone watching the remake is for them to watch that first and go, oh, I should really watch some older horror movies. If it's somebody who, this sounds condescending and I don't mean it to, but like it might be just getting into horror movies and they're watching more like kind of polished, easier to digest ones. Sure. Watch that one. And then just be like, oh yeah, they made one in the early 70s too. I should check that out. Like if it gets someone to watch the original, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I said this in the first one where it's like when I first saw it, I wasn't expecting much out of it or I didn't get much out of it because I think I was expecting a lot more, it to be a lot different than it was. And sometimes it's just the aesthetics of what you're into, that can change. But but it's worth, it's worth, I think it was Chumps Love Insta was talking about doing a franchise backwards. And that's kind of an interesting idea, is like starting at the end. And then, but I started thinking about doing the Saw series that way. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, we know it's him. Like, why is this a surprise? You get to the first one and you're like, yeah, I know all this already.
Yeah. So how far away from Baghead did we get on this one?
I think it stayed pretty true to Baghead. I mean, you have, like you said, his stuff was kind of ill-defined, but it's still, even in part 4, it was Evil Kid. It's just different shades of how you tell that story. Yeah. And they leaned, like in the remake, they leaned into him being more just evil child versus ambiguous child. And then Delia is just a little jerk. Right. But it was like,
I guess you had different ages,
but it's still, it's because of that, like you are going to get a certain, you would hope that Damien in the third one as a grown man is different than Damien in the first one. But yeah, I thought that stayed fairly consistent. Although like some of the plot wise, some of those elements just went out the window.
Yeah. 7 daggers. Now you just need one.
Now you just need one.
That kind of thing.
He's with the president. No, he's not.
Yeah.
Now he's the head of Thorn, this like multi-billion-dollar corporation, but like, I want to be an ambassador. Yeah.
But it's still firmly affixed in the Christian theology mixed with politics. Yeah. And it doesn't stray from that. And like I said, I'm glad it doesn't stray too far from that. That's fine for me because both of those two things I find interesting.
And I'm curious what they're going to do with because the new one that's coming out is the prequel. And I know that like the woman that's directing it, Arkasha Stevenson, has done some TV stuff, did an episode of Legion, which I stopped watching after the first season. I was kind of like, I don't need more, but okay. Yeah. So someone that's actually, directed some movies before, and I think written by David S. Goyer, which could go either way. I like some of his stuff. I don't like some other stuff. There's multiple names on there. I think hers is as well.
I mean, is it a prequel to the 2006 movie, or is it a prequel to 1970?
I think it's a prequel to the 2006 movie, I would think.
Okay. Making it a period piece would automatically make me a tad bit more interested in it. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's it's kind of interesting because just without getting too much into it, because I want to go in as cold as possible. Really, is that it does sound like a little bit more, almost a folk horror thing of discovery, a little bit more mysterious, of like discovering the sect that's permeated the church that maybe is trying to bring about. But I think that's cool to kind of go back to that, because I do think, as we've talked about, that first one is such a whodunit. In a sense of like, we're not real sure about Damien's powers. If they're real, it's really about this sort of family, this guy falling apart and all this stuff happening and his life getting upended. And certainly that's been the case with like Friday the 13th. First one of that is a whodunit. First Saw is a whodunit. And so I thought it handled being like losing that mystery pretty well overall. I think the remake, because the remake doesn't have that mystery, I don't think it works as well. Yeah. And 4 is whatever, it's silly. But I think that escalation, although again, not perfect, I do think they were able to get around that a bit. Because they kind of hit some of the same notes in 2 about like, oh, well, now there's this horror of Babylon to worry about.
Oh, right.
Which doesn't, but like that doesn't really matter. That was kind of just in the background of this other stuff. So I thought that was, they were able to sort of navigate that, I think, pretty effectively. So it'll be interesting to go back to that, to a little bit more of a mysterious thing, and it makes me a little bit more interested in it. Yeah,
it does me too. And sometimes I complain about it, but sometimes I like it. But like, I don't mind horror lore so much. Like that can get your brain firing on like interesting like ideas here and there. We might end up with some bullshit Pet Sematary added lore, which I would not be a fan of. But if they're going to go back and talk about intra-church intrigue, I think that you just chalk that up to, well, I like religious horror anyway, and so I'm going to be more on board with that kind of thing. Yeah. At the outset. It's a topic that I like, so I'm more interested in it just knowing that little fact. Yeah. But it could end up being that it starts as a mystery and then like, she's at a dog park and she and a jackal lock eyes, then it becomes a rom-com. I don't know. Yes. She thought she could have it all. And then this bad boy jackal shows up. One of those, they just spend half the movie yelling at each other and then they secretly fall, they fall finally know. Well, would it have to be the small town, like a Hallmark movie? Like she goes back during Christmas time. Yeah. We get the Christmas going. Yeah. He's the bad boy in the small town. She's very religious and he's like, man, religion is dumb. Yeah. What you should do is smell butts. I'm a jackal. Get on my motorcycle and wear this jacket, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's like Joe Camera, but a jackal. But a jackal. Joe Jackal. Joe Jackal. There we go. That's the title. Yeah, the Jokel. Oh, God. But sure, yeah, I can't decide like what I would find interesting for our next Omen, like we often talk about, because I don't feel like this franchise has fallen too far afield. And I keep saying, like, I just like these themes and such. So I'm pretty okay with it, but I wouldn't want to see a follow up to that Damien. I wouldn't want to see an Omen 2 based on the remake. Right. Because that Damien's already evil. There's no real growth to happen there. And there's no growth at all. I guess I do like the idea of going backwards. Yeah. I mean, you could, in theory, I don't think it's not even like specifically about a certain thing or person. But I think in this time we're at now, that you could make another Omen that's like, here's this thing that's obviously stupid and bad, and everyone going, let's get it going. Let's make way for that thing. Let's, I think there's, not to just sound like a grumpy old man yells at cloud, but I do think there's a certain amount of that, like stuff flying in the face of what's evident in front of you and everyone else is, and that kind of like, I don't know, almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers thing where you're like that sort of paranoia of like, am I the only one that notices that this guy's the devil and no one else really cares? Right. And following him blindly. Yeah. I don't know. I seriously, I haven't yet, but I do want to go and read some of those books because they do sound like they get nuts. And so there you go that route. Be like, we've decided to be true to the novelizations for the fans out there. Yeah. For the for the one guy. Yeah. What is your favorite kill? Oh man. Almost want to say, I mean, the Meshach Taylor kill in 2, where he gets, oh my gosh, it probably comes from 2, because like the elevator kill in that was pretty great. The Elizabeth Shepard, the Joan Hart truck
the crow truck nonsense.
Goodness. I forgot about that one until just now.
It was so wonderful.
Yes.
So that might be, I think one of those two, because it's just so over the top and absurd.
Right. I mean, I would not argue with either one of those two. And I was worried that, I feel like I'm just being boring and saying the original lightning rod falling into the priest, I think is so simple and effective. It's just one of those kills that you don't need a ton of effects and you don't need a ton of staging, but there's something about how it is staged that really works for me. Yeah. And just the fact that they hold on the shot of him slumped over. Yeah. And then of course the 1-2 punch of, him on the newspaper afterwards is just, that cracks me up. And I think that could be the best, but of course, lest we forget David Warner. That's got to be an honorable mention in there.
Yeah. Do you have any interest in, just you personally, in checking out the Damien television show?
Oh, God.
Because we haven't talked about that. How there's, in 2016, there was a TV show about Damien from the executive producers of The Walking Dead and The Shield. Which I always love when they do that. Like, I don't, like the executive producers. What does that even mean? Yeah.
Tell me who the showrunner is, not the executive producer who greenlit it. If I had not looked that up and saw the one promotional still of it, I would say yes. But that one promotional still of it annoyed me so much, of just all those characters in a room. And it was so touched up and airbrushed and everybody just looks like a smug jerk. You know what? I should have at least watched one episode of that just for the whole completionism element of this, but I forgot about it completely. So
yeah, well, so did everyone, because apparently it's not very good. But I'm kind of curious, but I don't feel
it was AMC.
What was it originally?
If it's A&E. Oh. Yeah, because they're known for putting out prestige television.
Yeah. Well, they had some. Didn't they have the Tudors or something? I don't remember.
Oh, I suppose so.
Yeah. Yeah. But I it's always just so funny because to me, growing up, A&E was arts and entertainment, and it was a little bit like fancier stuff. And then it just got like the first 48, and and then so now they're doing this. It's like I think it actually aired right after, like in the slot following the Bates Motel.
Oh goodness. Okay.
Yeah. So they were just like, oh well, that's popular. So let's do the Omen now, and it seems like that just didn't go as well.
Didn't take. Yeah. So just one season?
Just one season, 10 episodes, and I still have never seen any of the Bates Motel show either.
Yeah, neither have I. Yeah, forgot about that. Anyway, well, unless you have any final thoughts, I think we can investigate our total kill count for the franchise. Yeah, we've been over it. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us along this, and thank Becky Dark and Jolene Marie Richardson for joining us on this journey. They were a lot of fun to talk to about it. And you should check out their respective podcasts. Absolutely. Yeah. And I really want to have both of them back. Becky, of course, was a returning champion. Jolene was so much fun to talk to as well, especially bringing a lot of the costume design and art direction perspective that neither John nor I would have stumbled upon. Now, every time I see a sweater in a horror movie, it's going to be wolf in sheep's clothing. A wolf sweater, yeah. It's always fun to like look at new ways to look at movies, or like things you didn't think about before, based on somebody else's discipline and education and study. There are times where I just wish I could flip a switch in my brain that's like, I would be as dumb as I was in high school and enjoy this movie again. No, for sure. Well, moving on to our kill count, I checked the tape before we recorded, and John, you had predicted 22 deaths for the entire franchise. Ooh. I had predicted 26. Now, it's important to remember that part 1 only had 6 deaths in it. Yeah. So that was kind of what we were gauging it on. The remake, just for grins, had 7 deaths. The bonus death being the Pope. If you're going to make a bonus death. That's a bonus death. Yeah, you go for the Pope at the end. That's that brass ring, baby. But in between, there was quite a jump. In fact, part 2 had 15 deaths in it. Whoa. Because you had the scene of all the gases escaping and those people getting, their faces fried off and that kind of stuff. So total tally for the entire franchise was 50. Whoa, dang. A lot more than I would have expected. Yeah. Clearly. Yeah. So twice as much as our greatest Yes.
So does that count? Because I mean, you don't, in the wrap ups. I don't remember if you mentioned this or like in the respecting the dead or whatever, remembering the dead. Does that include like all the, like each time you saw a cutaway to like Boy Scouts going up to the door and being like, we're here to do our good deed or whatever? Like, was that a kill?
Yeah, I think
for each of those babies,
the baby kills were included, I think, but not when it cuts to the news and says there's like 33 more babies killed. It was like the ones that were, it could be off screen, but in story, I guess. At least I'm pretty sure that's what I counted. But yeah, so part 2 and part 3 did have a big jump in fatalities. So, I mean, that tracks with how these franchises go. And, to your point, the montage with all the baby killing.
Yeah.
And then the gas chamber eruption of part 2 was a high body count as well. So I'm not going to say that's easier, but I'm just saying that like it's kind of like an area of effect kill that you knock out a lot of bodies with.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something like, I think this was also pretty consistent with its kills. In terms of like some were a bit more bombastic, some were a little bit quieter, so to speak. Yeah. And I'm glad they kept that, because even the stuff that got like pretty ridiculous, it made sense it didn't feel like necessarily out of place with the movie. Like the tone of the second one got a little silly, and so as wild as that as the crow truck death was, it's like okay, I was not expecting this, but okay, this still sort of fits. Totally,
yeah. So there you have it. 50 big deaths in the Omen series.
I will say, I'll add an addendum though, and I'll say the maybe not my favorites, but the most horrifying deaths for me was the Bugenhagen in part 2, like slowly getting like drowned in sand
under the. Oh yeah,
and then as we talked about in the remake, I did really like the blood bubble.
Yes,
I thought that was very effective.
I also liked the under the ice in part 2.
Under the ice. Yeah. That was really good.
Really tense and suspenseful and scary. And
So
frozen lake water.
Maybe that's not why those aren't my favorite. My favorite is just like, yay, death. But when it's actually like kind of realistic, I'm like, oh God, that's terrifying.
I don't like that.
Sucks.
Well, thanks a lot for everybody who watched along with us. Like I say, each wrap up, I love it when people do that. And thanks for commenting on our Instagram and talking about it with us. That's always a blast. So
always love hearing from people.
And a slight addendum to that. Thanks so much for the positive feedback on the Twin Peaks bonus episode that we dropped last week for Twin Peaks Day, and it seemed to be pretty overwhelmingly positive. So I'm just going to take that as evidence that John and I are just going to have to figure this out and move forward with going. Right. Figuring out the format, figuring out how often it'll be released, because I know that people won't want to wait every other week to watch Twin Peaks.
To watch a 45-minute
show. So I get that there will be a little bit more of an appetite for that, because once you get rolling on that show, you're not going to want to stop. In fact, I'm willing to believe that you will probably outpace us based on like a weekly posting. So we heard you loud and clear. We definitely appreciate hearing from people who we hadn't heard from before too. So Rando Rusty, thanks for giving us a shout via email. So I think we will have to look into making this happen. One way or the other. Definitely excited for people to watch it along with friends who have not seen it before, or if they're watching it on their own for the first time, which I know was a case of both.
Well, it's funny. Just today, as of this recording, Joyce Carol Oates got on Twitter.
Saw that.
And was like, I don't know why people like Twin Peaks. I try it again. I just don't get it. And it's like, oh, Joyce.
Well, it's also, as Twitter has a tendency to do, people were just like slamming her and calling her dumb and all that kind of stuff, where I'm just like, it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. It's also like, particularly if you are still wasting your life on Twitter, which that is not a judgment, because I do. The Joyce Carol Oates is a figure like known for just some of the, like just tweeting some goofy stuff, both like in a hell yeah, that rules. That's just awesome off the wall stuff. And then like, I don't know about that with Joyce, but you know, you got to take the sour with the sweet. And
not going to lie on this one.
So, but it's also like, it makes sense that she wouldn't be into it.
Sure.
I like that, like, she has written so many books, but I'm like, yeah, her tweets. That's what I know her
There
for.
you go.
I'm not reading. You write any Warhammer stuff? Then who cares?
Yeah. I won't read your books, but what hot takes you got?
Yeah.
We're a culture of takes. That's my
it.
take.
Ooh, how hot.
Stand back. Takes coming through.
But yeah, so it's fun to go. Like, I couldn't help it when we were watching it, think about how different TV is now versus what it was then. Not just, I mean, that show has its own vibe itself, but just TV was a lot different.
Yeah.
TV was less cinematic. So
yeah, we'll figure that out. That will become a priority over the next couple months. So we'll keep you posted. But until then, we wanted to do something short and sweet for the next one, even though there were 5 Omens.
Yeah.
Wanted to work with our scheduling, which our scheduling can be a little bit difficult sometimes when you have a very strict format of only releasing episodes in order of a franchise. So if you're planning on something, you got to like take that into consideration. So we're going with something short and sweet this time, and we're going to talk about Basket Case.
Short and sweet.
Yes.
Do you think Basket Case?
Just like Belial.
Yeah, short and just adorable. So much love to give.
Yeah, he just wants love. If you haven't seen these, they're pretty grimy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Frank Henenlotter. They're fun. They're grimy.
Yeah.
The first one is on Shudder. I did double check the other two. Those are on Tubi. So I know that there's ads on Tubi, and some people don't like that. I totally get it. It reminds me of watching horror movies at 4 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon on WGN. You know, there's a little nostalgia for that for me. Yeah. But if you haven't checked out Basket Case, definitely do so, especially before the next record. But it's pretty gross.
Yeah.
So,
or get them on disc, on Blu-ray, 4K, whatever. Just because
absolutely.
Because who knows how long it's going to be streaming at those places, and then you'll always have them. You'll always have Belial with you.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, it's basically, it's not even like, I was going to make an allusion to going from the Omen to Basket Case is like taking off your school clothes and putting on your play clothes. But this is just more like taking off your school clothes and immediately having hepatitis. Right. Basket Case is it's grimy. And I'm excited to get back into it. I'm excited to leave behind this air of
classiness.
Of classiness, this air of respectable filmmaking, and just get into some nastiness.
Let's go from Richard Donner to
Frank Henenlotter.
Exactly. Yeah. So follow us along down to the grimy parts of New York City in the early 80s when it looks its cinematic best, I think. So.
Like if you like the cartoonishly evil Manhattan of Jason Takes Manhattan, this is sort of what that's based on.
This is what you actually want, I think.
This William Lustig's Maniac, all that stuff.
All right, well, until then, you can find us at This May Hurt a Bit Pod on Instagram, Hurt a Bit Pod on YouTube, and you can email us at thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com. So we'll see you next week for Basket Case.
Good night.
Good night. This has been a Caretaker Press production. It was produced by James Strayer and edited by John C. Myers. Logo by Ethan Kimberling and music by Michael Arthur Holloway, who you can find on Bandcamp. Follow us on Instagram at thismayhurtabitpod and email us at thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com. Give us a 5-star review over on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time.